Hey everybody, welcome back. So today is a bit of a fun project. Now, I'm in the process of moving right now, and I figured in order to take less pieces of scrap wood with me, I would turn them into something beautiful. Now, I kind of made this up as I went along because I was limited to the wood that I had on hand, but the whole thing is made out of scraps. And I think it turned out actually pretty awesome, so check it out. All right, after staring at my admittedly relatively small pile of wood for a little while, I found a couple of pieces of longish plywood that would work great for the sides. I also had a couple of pieces that were smaller that would actually work good for the top, bottom, and middle shelf. For the trim on the front, I had a piece of leftover 1x2, but it wasn't enough. I did, however, have a leftover 1x4 that I could rip a 1x2 out of, and that would leave me with about 2 inches left over to make a base out of. And then for the top, I had this piece of laminated pine left over from working on closet shelves. Now, the size of this and the size of the plywood that I had is actually pretty similar, and that's all going to kind of dictate the size of cabinet I can build. With all my pieces selected, I could rip them all to the exact same width. And then I also cut a rabbet in the back for a piece of 1/2-inch plywood for my back panel. Now, this is admittedly not the safest way to do it. A 1/4-inch plywood backer, I would just use my rabbeting bit and the router, but I wanted to use a 1/2 inch just for a bit more heft to it. From there, I could rip my top, my middle shelf, and my bottom all to the same size, and I just gang cut them because I don't have a stop block. And then to put the entire thing together, we're not going to go crazy fancy with it because we're going to be hiding a lot of this anyway. So I'm just going to drill and countersink some screws from the outside and then glue the entire thing together. Once I had everything lightly clamped together and lined up, I went ahead and added a couple of 1.5-inch long brad nails, and that was mostly just to stop the wood glue from making everything slide around on each other when I went to drive the screws in. Now the screws are also 1.5 inch long, and I finished pre-drilling into my second board there just to prevent any chance of the plywood swelling up when the screw went in. Now, one thing I will say is it's going to be a lot easier to add your center panel right now as opposed to putting the other side on and then trying to slip it down in between the two, because you're just going to end up getting glue everywhere and it's going to be harder to line up. So this way is just a little simpler. Now, after ripping my 1x4 down for my face frame as well as my base, I started working on the trim and I noticed an issue. Okay, so I'm kind of making this whole thing up as I go along. And one thing I realized when staring at this right now is once I add my face trim on, it's going to hang down into the bottom cabinet and build up into the bottom cabinet quite a bit. And that's going to make this hole too small to just add things in for storage or something like that. So I decided to add a drawer. Now the benefit to adding a drawer, obviously I'll utilize the space better, but I get to use a little bit more wood from my pile. And I went digging through the pile and I have the perfect material. Now I have this piece of 1/2-inch birch plywood. Is the perfect height for a drawer. Just got to cut it to length. I've got a random piece of 1/4-inch plywood that once I trim it to size is the perfect size for the bottom. And I've got a random piece of pine plywood that I've had for years. Too big of a piece to throw away, but it's the only piece of pine that I have. Now because I'm painting this thing, I can get away with using a different species for the drawer front itself. Now I did some measurements. I've got just enough of the bulk of material here before I get to this angled cut to cut my drawer front out of. So perfect. But that does mean I'm going to have to buy some drawer slides for each side as well as a drawer pull, but I figured that's not such a big deal. I'm also going to go out and buy a couple of pieces of trim, and that will cover up my screws on the top as well as the bottom. And it's just going to dress this thing up a little bit more so it's not just a plain box. And I'm going to fill these ones in before I paint. Now because I'm buying the trim by the foot, again, I'm going to have no leftover, so it's not such a big deal. Now we got to get after it. With that conundrum averted, we can move on to our face frame finally. Now, there's a few different ways you could build face frames. This way is just the simplest one. That's going to be a painted piece anyway, so this method works great. I'm just going to stick build the whole thing in place, starting with the sides and then working my way into the center. And I'm just going to glue and fasten the whole thing on with some 1.5-inch long brad nails. Once it's painted and all the holes are filled, you're never going to know anyway. Now for our base molding, we're going to be using this small chair molding that I found. Now this is just off the shelf molding that I found at the hardware store. It's available in a lot of places, so it's not that hard to find. But we're going to go ahead and measure and cut everything to size, referencing the cabinet itself first. We're not attaching anything to the cabinet. From there, we can go ahead and cut our top trim, and I'm just going to use this small crown molding that I found, and we're going to repeat that same process for all of those pieces. Once everything is cut to size, then we can glue them together. Now we're going to pre-glue these before attaching to the cabinet with some CA glue and some accelerator, touch them together. They're dry in a couple of seconds. But this method is going to ensure our nice tight joints at all of the corners and that everything lines up perfectly with our trim, as opposed to trying to put them on the cabinet one piece at a time. Now you'll also notice that these are hiding all of the screws along the side for the top as well as the bottom. Then using a couple of pine 1x2s, we can build out the drawer slide runners, I think they're called. It doesn't matter. Build out the side walls so they're flush with the face frame for the drawer slides later on. And then we can start building our drawers. Now again, these are just going to be super easy pocket hole drawers, and I've got a crazy detailed video on my channel if you need to know how to build some drawers yourself. Before we throw finish to this guy, I just want to go over a couple of things. Now, you saw me take my drawer front here and apply a whole bunch of drywall spackle to the outside edges, and that's just to seal up any imperfections in between all the plies here and the layers, just to give it a much nicer look once it's painted. And on the cabinet itself, you may have noticed that this little piece of poplar right here is different. Didn't have enough material left over to make all three rails out of poplar, so what I ended up doing is taking a cut-off piece of my stile, and I ended up actually cutting it to length and stabbing it in here and gluing and nailing this on. Now I've added a bunch of glue to the joint as well as to the plywood, and once it's sanded smooth, I close my eyes, I can't even feel that seam. So because we're going to be painting this guy, you're never going to know it anyway, because that's the beauty of painting, it hides all sins. The other reason it's not such a big deal is it's not really a stress joint, it's just trim, so it's going to be perfectly fine. And the final thing is on the base. Now for the base, you may have noticed that I only miter cut the front corners. The back side is actually butt jointed together, and the wood is different too. Now the wood back here is pine. Now it's the exact same pine that I used in the drawer runners. Again though, it's not such a big deal. Once the cabinet's sitting on here and it's slid up against a wall, all you're going to see down the side of it is poplar, the front poplar, the other side is poplar. The pine's going to be hidden on the back and underneath, so it's not such a big deal. Sometimes you just got to make things work when you're using nothing but scraps. Let's throw color at this guy. And that wraps up this project. I had fun with it. I hope you enjoyed watching it. If you did, comment, let me know down below what you liked about it. Leave me a thumbs up, and if you want to support the channel further, I've got a link down below to plan so you can build something for yourself. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next one.